Today's story is the story of Esther. After the exile and return, many of God's people did not return to their homeland, but continued to live in many lands. Mordecai and his cousin Esther, whom Mordecai adopted and raised as his daughter when her parents died, were among the people of God who did not return. They made their home in Susa, the capital city of Persia, where King Xerxes had his palace. Once, for a special celebration, King Xerxes invited all his officials to a great banquet. The king wanted to show his guests how beautiful his queen was, but she refused to appear before them. The king became angry and he dismissed the queen from his court and decided to look for a new queen. Now, King Xerxes had many unmarried women brought to the palace, so he could choose a queen from among them. Now, Esther was one of those young women, and when the king saw Esther, she looked the most beautiful of all to him, so he crowned her his new queen. And Mordecai told Esther not to tell the king that she was a Jew when she went to the palace to live, and she obeyed his request. Each day, Mordecai came to sit by the palace gate to send messages to Queen Esther and receive back her news. One day, Mordecai heard of a plot to kill the king. Mordecai immediately sent a message to Esther telling her to warn the king, and she did so in the name of Mordecai, and the king's life was saved. Later, the king promoted a man named Haman to the highest position in the kingdom and ordered all his officials and the people of Susa to honor Haman by kneeling before him any time he passed. Now, Mordecai refused to bow down before Haman because he was a Jew. Now, this made Haman so furious that he wrote a law to have all Jewish families killed. He used the the lots, like dice, to set the date when the killing would take place. Now, Haman had the king seal the law with his ring, and then had copies posted and read throughout the kingdom. In all the king's provinces, all Jews, young and old, women and children, are to be destroyed and killed, and their goods plundered on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is Adar. Well, when Mordecai read the law, he and all the Jews in Susa put on sackcloth and covered their head with ashes, fasted, and mourned. Then he sent word of the new law to Esther inside the palace and asked her to go before the king and ask him to revoke or cancel the law. Now, Esther sent word back to Mordecai that she could not go before the king because anyone who came to the king without the king asking for them, would be killed, unless the king extended his gold scepter. Mordecai replied, "Esther, you will die with your people unless you act. Perhaps you were made a queen for such a time as this." And then Esther agreed to go to the king if the people would continue to fast and pray with her for 3 more days. When Esther appeared before the king, at risk of her life, he held out his gold scepter and received her. Esther asked the king if he and Haman would come to dinner, which she would prepare that evening. And the king gladly agreed. After the meal, the king asked for Esther's request, even if it be half his kingdom. Esther said she'd make her request the next evening if the king and Haman would return for another dinner. They agreed. Haman was happy as he left the dinner, but when he came through the palace gate, he saw Mordecai, who would not bow to him or show him any respect. This made Haman mad, but he said nothing. Haman went home and bragged to his family and friends about his great wealth and the many ways the king honored him, about how the officials respected him, and that he was the only one Esther invited to dinner with the king. And then he said, "But I still can't be happy as long as I see Mordecai, who will not respect me." Now Haman's families and friends told him to build a tower and ask the king Mordecai from it. And Haman liked that idea. Now that night, the king could not sleep, so he had a servant read to him from the record book of the kingdom. And when the servant read how Mordecai had saved the king's life, but had not been honored, the king decided to honor Mordecai. And the next morning, Haman had a hanging tower built, and then went before the king. Now before Haman could ask the king to hang Mordecai, the king asked Haman how he should honor someone. And Haman, thinking that person must be him, told the king to put a royal robe on that person and let him be led through the streets of Susa, riding the king's horse, led by an official who would announce, "This is how the king honors a man." Now Haman's suggestion pleased the king, so he told Haman to go and do this for Mordecai. As Haman led Mordecai in honor through the streets of Susa, he felt deeply shamed. That evening, Esther had a second dinner for the king and Haman and made her request. She told the king that she was a Jew and asked him to save her people from being killed. Now, in the land of Media and Persia, the king could not change a law once it was made. So Esther blamed Haman for this cruel law, and Haman begged Esther to save him. But the king ordered Haman to be hung on his own gallows. Then the king brought Mordecai to the palace and made him the highest official in the kingdom, and gave Mordecai permission to make a law that would save the Jews. So Mordecai wrote a law and quickly sent it to be read and posted in all the provinces and in Susa, the capital. On the 13th day of Adar, in the 12th month, the Jews in every city and province will be allowed to get together and defend themselves. Now, after the Jews defeated their enemies, they celebrated. And then Mordecai sent letters to the Jews everywhere, telling them to celebrate this victory each year. Each year you must celebrate on the day when we Jews defeated our enemies. Remember this time when our sorrow was turned to joy. Celebrate by having parties, giving to the poor, and by sharing gifts of food with each other. Now Now, Queen Esther supported Mordecai's letter with a letter of her own, establishing the celebration as the festival of Purim, the lots. And her letter said, "We pray that all of you will live in peace and safety. You must remember to celebrate Purim at the time and in the way we have said." So every year the Jews still celebrate Purim by having parties, giving to the poor, and sharing food. They especially enjoy games in which they spin the dreidel with the Hebrew letters which begin each word of their grateful statement of faith. A great miracle happened here. Now, I wonder what you liked best about this story. I wonder what you think is most important about this story. I wonder where you are in the story. What part is about you? I wonder if there's anything in the story we could leave out and still have all the story that we need. So today I'm going to read from this book, The Festival of Esther, the Story of Purim, retold by Maida Silverman, illustrated by Carolyn Ewing. I'm just going to read the story of a holiday part, since we're going to hear the story is the story. So, the story told in the book of Esther took place in Persia, now Iran, around 500 BC. The Purim story is described in the Megillat Esther, or the Scroll of Esther. The Megillah means scroll. Now, long ago, books were written on rolls of paper called scrolls. The word Purim comes from an ancient word, pur, meaning lots. In ancient times, if a person wanted to decide something important, he or she often tossed small objects, such as stones, onto the ground. So it's called casting lots. And the pattern the lots made on the ground helped the person who cast them make decisions. Now, Haman cast lots made from small stones in order to decide what day and month to pick for the destruction of the Jews. And this is why Purim is also called the Feast of Lots. Purim begins at sundown on the 13th day of the Hebrew month of Adar, usually in March. Now, many Jews don't eat or drink on this day in honor of Queen Esther, who did not eat or drink for 3 days before she asked King Xerxes to spare her people. The 15th day of Adar is called Shushan Purim because some Jews were still fighting Haman's soldiers on that day. At sundown on the 13th day of Adar, again the next morning, Jewish families go to the synagogue to hear the Megillah read out loud. And on Purim, making noise is encouraged, even in the synagogue. Everyone waits for Haman's name to be mentioned, and as soon as it is, children twirl groggers, rattles, which make a loud grinding noise, hit sticks together and shout. Adults stamp their feet, and this is done to fulfill the command, "May his name be blotted out." Purim is a holiday filled with happiness. On the 14th day of Adar, Jewish schools, centers, and synagogues have Purim celebrations. There are parties, masquerades, parades, and plays that tell the story of Esther. Children and even adults dress in all kinds of costumes. They paint their faces and put on masks. At home, the family gathers for a festive afternoon meal called Purim Seudah, or the Purim Feast. And Purim would not be Purim without special cookies called hamantashen for dessert. Children like to help prepare and distribute Purim gifts called shalak manot, plates of cookies, cakes, and candy to neighbors, relatives, and friends. And it's important to bring the shalak manot to the poor, the elderly, and people who were alone so that they too may enjoy Purim. And whenever a Jewish community escaped disaster, the rabbis allowed the community to make that day a special Purim and celebrate it every year. And there are many such Purims in Jewish history. There are even family Purims. When a particular family has been saved from a terrible fate, that family makes it a custom to celebrate its own very special Purim. The Purim celebrating the events in the book of Esther are echoed in special Purims celebrated today. So, maybe you'd like to try to make hamantashen. They're the triangular shaped cookies with yummy stuff inside. You may assume that the chocolate ones are best. Prune is very traditional. Poppy seeds. Walnuts. But they're delicious and fun to make. So, I hope you enjoyed the story of Esther. I think that there are a lot of things in the Purim celebration that are not so different from some of our Lenten observances. That idea of making sure that you bring food to the hungry, visit with the lonely. Those are good things to do in Lent too. Thinking about the good things that God has done for you. That's a fine way to prepare to get ready to come close to that mystery of Easter. So, it is Lent, but I thought it would be nice to talk about Purim and the story of Esther because our Jewish friends, our Jewish neighbors are celebrating Purim this week. And we had, well, a hard week last week. And sometimes it's nice to celebrate that you've made it through a hard time. So, I hope you enjoyed that story. And maybe just let's close with a prayer. God, thank you for helping us get through a very difficult week. Thank you for our families. Thank you for our neighbors who either helped us or who we could help. Thank you for our teachers who we missed very much when we weren't in school. And we look forward to getting back to some normal this coming week. Help us to think about those less fortunate than ourselves, especially during Lent, as we prepare to come close to the mystery of Easter. Amen. I hope you have a really good week. We'll see you soon.